In this courtroom, the most common phrase I hear is, "It wasn't me." People blame the weather, the traffic signs, other drivers, or bad luck. It is human nature to defend oneself, to push blame away. But let me tell you about a Tuesday morning that silenced the entire room, not because of a loud argument, but because of a whisper. It was the day a man with nothing left to lose stood before me and refused to defend himself, uttering 4 words that stopped the proceedings cold. It was my fault. His name was Thomas. No last name in the initial booking, just Thomas. The docket listed him as homeless. No fixed address. The charges were serious: vandalism, destruction of property, and disorderly conduct. The report from the arresting officer. Officer Malier, tough veteran of the force who doesn't shock easily, was unusual. It read, "Suspect threw a brick through the front window of Sal's Market at 2:15 a.m. Suspect did not flee. Suspect sat on the curb and waited for a patrol unit. Upon arrival, suspect immediately presented hands for cuffing and stated, 'It was my fault.' Usually, when someone breaks a window at 2 in the morning, they run. They hide. They don't sit on the curb waiting to be arrested." That detail bothered me. I reviewed the security footage before taking the bench. It was a rainy night. You could see Thomas pacing in front of the market for 10 minutes. He looked conflicted. He wasn't raging. He wasn't drunk. He looked desperate. Then he picked up a loose brick from a nearby construction pile, closed his eyes for a second, and threw it. The glass shattered. The alarm screamed. And Thomas didn't grab anything. He didn't loot the register. He just sat down on the wet pavement, pulled his knees to his chest, and waited. When Thomas walked into my courtroom, the air changed. He was a small man, withered by years of hard living. He wore a coat 3 sizes too big, held together with safety pins and duct tape. His shoes were mismatched. Yet, despite the rags, there was a strange dignity in the way he held his head. He didn't look at the floor. He looked straight at me with eyes that were tired, deeply tired, but clear. Officer Miller stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Thomas, not with anger, but with a furrowed brow, as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't crack. "The case of the city versus Thomas," the clerk announced. Thomas stepped up to the microphone. He didn't wait for me to read the charges. He didn't wait for a lawyer to speak. He leaned into the mic, his voice raspy from the cold air, and said it again, immediately. "It was my fault, Your Honor. I broke the window. I did it on purpose. I am guilty." I paused. Usually, I have to drag the truth out of people. This man was offering it freely, but it didn't feel right. "Good morning, sir," I said gently. "I have the report here. You broke a window at Sal's Market. Officer Miller says you caused about $800 in damage. Do you understand the charges against you?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. Vandalism. I understand." "And you're pleading guilty. You admit to throwing the brick." "It was my fault," he repeated. "No one else made me do it. I threw it." I sat down. I waited. I looked at Officer Miller. "Officer, is that accurate?" He stepped forward. "Yes, Judge." It was the strangest thing. Usually, we have to chase these guys down blocks. When I pulled up, he waved me over. He put his hands behind his back before I even got out of the car. He told me, "I'm the one you want." It was my fault. He was completely cooperative, polite, even. I turned back to Thomas. "Sir, you aren't intoxicated. You don't appear to be under the influence of drugs. You didn't steal anything from the store. You broke the window and waited to be arrested. My question is, why?" Thomas shifted his weight and looked down at his worn-out shoes. The silence in the courtroom stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Usually, when I ask why, I get a lie story about an accident or a misunderstanding. But Thomas looked up and met my eyes with that same heartbreaking clarity. "It was cold, Your Honor," he whispered. "Tuesday night, it was 15 degrees. The wind was coming off the water. It cut right through this coat. He pulled the thin, duct-taped fabric tighter around himself. I went to the shelter on Broad Street. Full. I went to the one downtown. Full. I tried the church basement. They were at capacity by 6 o'clock. He paused, his voice trembling not from fear, but from the memory of that bone-chilling cold. I sat in the alley for a few hours. I stopped shivering around 1 a.m. That's when I got scared, Judge. When you stop shivering, that's when you don't wake up. I knew if I fell asleep out there, I'd freeze to death. I leaned back in my chair as the realization washed over me. So you broke the window to get arrested. Thomas finished the sentence for me. I knew if I broke the window, the alarm would trip. Officer Miller would come. He'd take me to the station. The holding cell is warm, Your Honor. They give you a bologna sandwich. It's dry, but it's food, and it's warm. I figured a broken window is better than a frozen body. I traded my freedom for a night of heat. A murmur moved through the courtroom. I saw Officer Miller lower his gaze to his boots. He knew, of course he knew. That was why he hadn't been angry, why he hadn't roughed him up. He was arresting a man who was begging for a cage just to survive the night. Thomas, I said, my voice softer now, you caused $800 in damage to a small business owner because you were cold. I know it was wrong, Thomas said quickly. I like Sal. He's given me coffee before. I didn't want to hurt him. That's why I waited. I wanted to make sure he knew it was me so I could pay for it eventually or work it off. But I had to choose Judge Sal's window or my life. I chose my life. I looked back at the docket. I wanted to know who this man was before the cold stripped everything from him. Thomas, have you always been on the streets? My records show no prior history, no arrests, no disturbances. You're 62 years old. What happened? Thomas straightened slightly, a flicker of his former self breaking through the grime. No, sir. I wasn't always like this. I was a machinist for 30 years. Worked at the textile plant in Pawtucket until it closed in '08. I had a house. I had a wife, Sarah. We were happy. His eyes filled when he said her name. Sarah got sick, 5 years of cancer. The insurance didn't cover the experimental treatments, but I couldn't just let her die. We sold the house, spent the savings, maxed out the cards. I spent every dime I had trying to save her. He wiped a tear with a dirty sleeve. I lost her anyway, and when she died, I didn't have anything left. No money, no house, no reason to try anymore. I just drifted, and here I am. The weight of it settled heavily in my chest. Here was a man who had done everything right, worked hard, loved his wife, sacrificed everything for her, and still fell through every crack until he was breaking windows to survive a Tuesday night. So you're telling me, Kay said, carefully summarizing for the record, that you are not a vandal, not a criminal. You are a grieving husband and a former machinist who is freezing to death. I am guilty, Your Honor, Thomas said stubbornly. I broke the law. I'm not asking for charity. I'm just telling you the truth. I looked toward Sal, the owner of the market, seated in the back row. He had come to demand restitution for his window. But as Thomas spoke, I watched Sal's expression change, the anger draining away, replaced by something else. Double quotes, Mr. Moretti, I called. Please step forward. Salvatore Moretti was a large man, built like a linebacker, with flour on his work boots and hands shaped by 40 years of lifting crates. He approached the railing, stopping just a few feet from Thomas. Thomas shrank back slightly, unable to meet the eyes of the man whose property he had destroyed. The shame radiating from him was unmistakable. Mr. Moretti, I said, you've heard the defendant's explanation. He admits to breaking your window and causing the damage. Under the law, you're entitled to restitution. You have every right to demand payment. Thomas spoke before Sal could answer, his voice cracking. I will, Sal, I promise. I know I don't look like much right now, but I still have my skills. My hands are steady. I can fix things. If the judge lets me, if I can get some work, I'll pay you back every cent. I didn't want to hurt you. I just didn't want to die. Sal studied Thomas for a long moment, truly looking at him. Then he let out a heavy sigh that echoed through the quiet courtroom and turned toward me. Your Honor, Sal said, his voice rough but steady. I've seen Thomas around the neighborhood for years. He never begs. He never bothers customers. Sometimes I see him sweeping the sidewalk in front of the shop just to have something to do. I wondered where he'd gone these last few months. T shook his head. I didn't know about his wife. I didn't know he was that desperate. Sal reached into his pocket. I thought he was pulling out the bill for the repair. Instead, he took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. Judge, I can't take money from a man who had to break a window just to keep from freezing. The insurance will cover the glass. It's a $500 deductible, but looking at him, he's paid enough. I don't want restitution. This courtroom released a collective breath. It was an act of mercy. Thomas looked up, stunned. Forget it, Tom, Sal said quietly. Just forget it. That is very generous of you, Mr. Moretti, I said, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Truly, it takes a big heart to forgive a financial loss like that. As far as the victim is concerned, the civil matter is settled. I turned back to Thomas. But, Thomas, we still have a problem, I said. The state has charged you with disorderly conduct and vandalism. Even if Mr. Moretti forgives the debt, you still broke the law. And more importantly, if I dismiss this case right now, if I let you walk out that door, where are you going to go? The question hung in the air. This was the cruel paradox of my job. Sometimes mercy looks like freedom, but for Thomas, freedom meant the street. Freedom meant the cold. Thomas glanced at the exit sign, then back at me. Panic flooded his eyes again. Judge, please, if you let me go, I'm back on the sidewalk. It's supposed to snow tonight. I checked the paper before I did it. It's going to be 10 degrees. He gripped the podium. I'm pleading guilty, Your Honor. Give me 30 days, please. 30 days in the county jail. It's warm there. They have blankets. If you let me go, I might not make it to morning. I have sat on this bench for a long time. I have heard people beg for mercy. I have heard people beg for forgiveness. I have heard people beg for a second chance. But it is a rare and terrible thing to hear a man beg for prison because it is the only place in the greatest country on earth where he can be guaranteed a blanket. Officer Miller spoke up from the side. Judge, I can't take him back to the station unless he's processed and sentenced. But if you sentence him, he gets a record. He becomes a felon. He loses any chance at the government housing programs he's already on the wait list for. If we lock him up, we might save him tonight, but we ruin him for tomorrow. I looked at Officer Miller. He was right. It was a trap. If I jailed him, I gave him warmth, but also a criminal record that would keep him from ever getting a job or an apartment again. If I released him, I kept his record clean but sent him back into the freezing cold that nearly killed him the night before. I removed my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose. There had to be a third option. There had to be a way to deliver justice without choosing between a cage and a coffin. Thomas said, I am not sending you to jail. You are not a criminal. You are a man in crisis. But Your Honor, Thomas cried out, terrified. I have nowhere to go. I didn't say I was sending you back to the street, I said firmly. I reached beneath my desk and pulled out my checkbook. The sound of the drawer opening was the only sound in the room. I opened it and placed it on the bench. Officer Miller's eyes widened. In 20 years of policing, he had seen judges hand down sentences, fines, and reprimands. He had seen gavels struck and warrants signed. He had never seen a judge pull out a personal checkbook in the middle of a criminal docket. The stenographer stopped typing. The gallery went silent. I uncapped my pen. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the frustration of a system that forces a good man to become a criminal just to survive winter. I wrote the date. I wrote the name of the Travelers Inn, a modest but clean motel a few miles from the courthouse. On the amount line, I wrote $500, Officer Miller. I said, breaking the silence, "Please approach the bench." He stepped forward, bewildered. I tore the check from the book and handed it to him. He looked at the amount, then at me, his mouth slightly open, then back at the check as if it couldn't be real. "Your Honor," he stammered, his tough demeanor cracking. This is your personal account." "It is," I replied. "Officer, I am remanding Thomas into your custody for exactly 1 hour. You are not taking him to the county jail. You are not taking him to the holding cell. You are going to drive him to the Travelers Inn. This check covers 2 weeks of a warm room, a hot shower, and 3 meals a day. Can I trust you to carry out this order?" Officer Miller looked at the check, then at Thomas, standing at the microphone and trembling. His expression softened completely. He tucked the check into his front pocket, straightened his uniform, and gave a sharp nod. "Consider it done, Judge. I'll drive him myself. I'll make sure he's settled." Hush. Thomas looked back and forth between us, panic rising again. "Judge, no. I can't pay you back. I have no money. I can't take charity. I worked for 30 years. I don't take handouts." "This is not a handout, Thomas," I said firmly, leaning forward. "And it is not charity. It is an investment." "An investment?" he asked, confused. "Yes, an investment in you. You told me you're a machinist. You told me you have skills. You told me you want to work. It's very hard to find a job when you haven't showered in a week. It's very hard to interview when you're freezing. And it's impossible to rebuild a life when you're just trying to survive the night." I pointed at him. "This is a contract, Thomas. I'm buying you 2 weeks of warmth, 2 weeks of dignity, 2 weeks to rest without fear of freezing. In exchange, you're going to use those 2 weeks to get back on your feet. You will go to the Department of Labor. You will contact the services officer Miller gives you. That is the deal. Do you accept?" Thomas gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles white. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He only nodded as tears streamed down his face, cutting clean lines through the grime and soot. He looked small, but for the first time since he entered the courtroom. He didn't look defeated, but Judge Thomas finally managed to choke out, "Why? You don't know me. I broke the law, 'cause, Thomas," I said, "we are not defined by our worst moments. We are defined by how we help one another rise from them. You broke a window to survive. That doesn't make you a criminal. It makes you a survivor. And you don't have to survive alone anymore." I glanced toward Sal Moretti in the gallery. He was standing now. He looked at Thomas, then at me, and raised his hand. "Judge," Sal called out, "wait a minute. If you're covering the room, I want in on this deal." I paused. "Mr. Moretti." Sal stepped up to the railing again, coming to stand beside Officer Miller. He looked at Thomas not as the man who broke his window, but as the man who used to sweep his sidewalk for free. 2 weeks isn't enough to get back on your feet," he said, his voice strong. "Thomas, you said you can fix things. You said you're a machinist." Thomas nodded, wiping his eyes. "Yes, Sal, I can fix anything with an engine. I can fix shelving. I can do electrical. My delivery van's been making a noise for a month," Sal said, "and I need shelves built in the back storage room. I can't pay a contractor's rate, but I can pay minimum wage, and I can give you lunch." Okay. He turned to me. "Judge, if he's willing to work, I'm willing to hire him starting tomorrow, part-time, cash at the end of the day until he gets a bank account set up." The courtroom reacted all at once, not with applause, but with a sharp, collective intake of breath. Officer Miller was smiling now, a real smile. Thomas stared at Sal as if he was seeing an angel. You'd let me work after I broke your window?" Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. You broke it because you were cold, Sal said with a shrug. I've been cold before, Tom. I remember. You show up tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late. I won't, Thomas said quickly. I promise I won't be late, smiled. This was justice as it was meant to be, not a hammer to crush the broken, but a tool to repair what was broken. As Officer Miller placed a guiding hand on Thomas's shoulder to lead him out, I thought the matter was finished, but Thomas stopped. He reached into the pocket of his oversized duct-taped coat and pulled out something small. He placed it gently on the edge of the bench, his hands shaking. A soft metallic clink echoed through the room. It was a small, tarnished silver locket on a broken chain, clearly the only thing of value he owned. Judge, Thomas said, his voice steady for the first time. This was Sarah's. My wife's. Her picture is inside. It's the only thing I didn't sell when she got sick. I slept with it in my hand every night so nobody would steal it. He slid it forward slightly. I want you to hold it as collateral. I looked at the locket, then back at Thomas. A man with nothing, who had faced death on the street, was offering his most precious possession to prove his honor. He wasn't asking for charity. He was asking for a loan and putting his heart up as security. Thomas, I said softly, I cannot take this. You have to, he insisted. You're using your own money for me. You don't know me. You need insurance. If I don't come back, if I don't make it, at least you have this. It's real silver. It's worth something. I understood then that this wasn't about money. It was about dignity. He needed to feel like a man making a deal, not a beggar taking scraps. Refusing would shame him. I reached out and picked up the locket. It was cold and heavier than it looked. I opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny, faded, black and white photograph of a young woman with a bright smile, and beside it, a lock of hair. I closed it gently and met Thomas's eyes. All right, Thomas, I said formally. I accept the collateral. I will place this in the court safe, sealed in an envelope with your name on it. But understand the terms of our agreement. This locket stays here until you come back and show me you've landed on your feet. When you return to this courtroom with a pay stub from Sal and a key to your own apartment, I give it back. That is the deal. Thomas nodded, relief washing over his face. That's the deal, Judge. Thank you. Sir Miller stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Thomas's back. Come on, Tom. Let's get you that hot shower. As they walked out, the courtroom stayed silent until the heavy oak doors clicked shut. I remained seated, holding Sarah's locket in my hand. It felt heavier than any gavel I had ever lifted. It carried the weight of a life, of a love story that ended in tragedy, and of a promise made by a man who had nothing left to give but his word. I handed the locket to the clerk. Lock this up, I whispered. Guard it with your life. That night I went home, but sleep would not come. I kept thinking about Thomas. I kept thinking about the check $500. To some, that's a nice dinner. To others, a new phone. But to Thomas, it was the difference between life and death. It was a bridge back to humanity. I wondered if I had done enough. I wondered if 2 weeks could undo years of bad luck. The next morning, I got my answer, but not from Thomas. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. Officer Miller was waiting outside my chambers. He wasn't in uniform. He was in plain clothes, looking tired but energized. Judge, Miller said, holding up a coffee cup. I dropped him off last night, got him checked in. The manager at the Travelers Inn, good guy. When I told him what you did, he gave Thomas the corporate rate. That $500, it's going to stretch for 3 weeks, not 2. That's good news, I said, unlocking my door. That's not all, Miller continued, following me inside. I stopped by Sal's Market on my way in, just to check. My stomach tightened. He was there, Miller said, with a grin. Thomas. He was there at 7:30 this morning, Judge 30 minutes early. He was sweeping up the glass he broke, had a broom in one hand and a coffee Sal gave him in the other. He looked different, clean, shaved, wearing work boots Sal found in the back. Miller paused, his voice thickening. Judge, when I pulled up, Thomas waved at me. He didn't look like a suspect anymore. He looked like a citizen. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you, officer. That's the best news I've heard all year. Okay, but the story didn't end there. In fact, that was only the beginning. The real surprise came 3 weeks later, on the day Thomas was scheduled to return for his status hearing. I entered the courtroom expecting to see Thomas looking a little better, maybe carrying a progress report. What I saw instead stopped me cold. The courtroom was full, a typical busy docket, but standing in the center aisle was a man I didn't recognize. He wore a pressed plaid shirt tucked into clean khaki pants and a pair of sturdy new work boots. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly trimmed. He stood straight, holding a manila folder in both hands. It took me a full 5 seconds to realize who he was. It was Thomas. Beside him stood Sal, wearing his best Sunday suit instead of his work apron, grinning like a proud father. Next to Sal was Officer Miller, standing at parade rest. He caught my eye and gave a subtle, sharp thumbs up. The case of the city versus Thomas, the clerk announced. Thomas walked to the microphone. He didn't shuffle. He didn't stare at the floor. He walked with purpose. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said. His voice was no longer thin and raspy. It was strong and steady, the voice of a man who had been eating regular meals and sleeping in a warm bed. "Thomas," I said, unable to hide my smile, "you look different." "I feel different, Judge," he replied, a small smile touching his lips. He opened the manila folder. "I have some things to show you to prove I kept my end of the deal." He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. I opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a letter from the manager of the Travelers stating that Thomas had been a model guest, that he cleaned his room daily, and had even repaired a broken ice machine in the lobby at no charge. The second was a pay stub from Sal's Market for 3 weeks of work, including 12 hours of overtime. The third was a copy of a lease agreement for a small studio apartment on the bus line, signed and dated for the 1st of the month. I looked up from the papers, a surge of pride rising in my chest. "I did what you said, Judge," Thomas said. "I worked, I saved. I got my ID back from the DMV. I'm not homeless anymore. I move in on Monday." "This is incredible," I said, holding up the lease for the courtroom to see. "In 3 weeks, you turned your entire life around. You went from a freezing alley to a signed apartment lease," I said. This is what resilience looks like." "Sal helped," Thomas said humbly, nodding toward the big man behind him. "He gave me a chance. And Officer Miller checked on me every day to make sure I was okay. But, Judge, there's one more thing." Thomas reached into his pocket. The room fell silent. I watched as he pulled out a neatly clipped stack of Bill's 5 $100 notes. He placed them carefully on the wooden rail of the defendant's stand. "I know you said it was an investment," Thomas said, his voice steady. "I know you said I didn't have to pay it back, but I pay my debts, Your Honor. This is the money for the room. I earned every cent fixing the van, building the shelves, stocking the cooler. It's clean money." I looked at the cash, then at Thomas. He wasn't just offering repayment. He was claiming his independence, telling me and the world that he no longer needed charity. He was standing on his own 2 feet. "Thomas," I said gently, "I can't take your money. I told you that was to get you started. Put it toward your new apartment. Buy some furniture. Fill your refrigerator." Thomas shook his head. "No, Judge. I've got money for the deposit. I saved everything else. I need to give this back." His eyes drifted toward the clerk's desk where the evidence was kept. "Because I need to buy something back. I need to redeem my collateral locket." In the excitement of his transformation, I had nearly forgotten. He wasn't paying me back just to settle a debt. He was paying to reclaim the symbol of his wife's love. He wanted to earn the right to wear it again. I nodded to the clerk. "Bring me the sealed envelope marked Thomas." The clerk unlocked the drawer and handed me the heavy envelope. I held it up. "Thomas, you don't need to pay me $500 to get this back. You earned it the moment you walked in here with that lease. The deal was that you land on your feet." "You did?" "Please, Judge," Thomas insisted. "Let me pay. I need to know I did this myself. I need to know I didn't take the easy way out. Sarashi would want me to pay my own way." I glanced at Sal. He nodded, a look that said, "Let him. He needs this." "All right, Thomas," I said, my voice thick. "I accept the payment." I signaled the bailiff to take the cash, then tore open the envelope. I slid the silver locket into my palm. It gleamed under the courtroom lights. I leaned forward and held it out. Thomas stepped closer. His hands were shaking again, but not from cold or fear, only gratitude. He took the locket, unclasped the chain, and fastened it around his neck, right there in the courtroom. He tucked the metal heart beneath his new plaid shirt, close to his own, and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I feel like I have her back now." Thought that was the ending. I thought the case was finally closed as I reached for the gavel to dismiss the charges. Officer Miller stepped forward once more. "Your Honor," he said, "before you do, there's one more person who wants to speak. Someone who saw what happened at the market 3 weeks ago." I frowned. "A witness." He pleaded guilty. "Not a witness to the crime," Miller said, a quiet smile on his face. "A witness to the man. She's been waiting outside." The heavy oak doors opened, and a young woman stepped in. She couldn't have been more than 30. Dressed simply, she clutched her handbag with both hands, her eyes darting around the room, frightened till they landed on the man at the defendant's microphone. She froze. Her hands flew to her mouth as a sob escaped. Thomas turned slowly. When he saw her, the color drained from his face. He grabbed the railing, his knees nearly buckling. The strength he had shown moments before vanished, replaced by disbelief and raw vulnerability. "Jenny," Thomas whispered. "Dad," the woman choked. "Quoi?" And then she ran. She didn't walk. She sprinted down the aisle, ignoring the bailiff, ignoring every rule of decorum, and threw her arms around Thomas. He stood stunned for a heartbeat, arms hovering as if afraid she might disappear. Then he wrapped her in a trembling embrace and broke down completely. "I'm sorry," he kept saying into her hair. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry." The courtroom was utterly silent, filled only with the sound of their sobs. Even the stenographer had stopped typing, wiping her eyes. I looked over at Officer Miller. He was beaming, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. He leaned toward the microphone, giving them a moment before speaking. "Your Honor," Miller said quietly, "when I ran Thomas's ID 3 weeks ago to get him into the housing system, a flag came up. Not a criminal warrant, a missing person report filed 2 years ago by her." He gestured toward the young woman. "Jennifer has been looking for him since the house was foreclosed. She lives 3 towns over. I called her this morning and told her Thomas would be here." Jennifer pulled back, framing her father's face with her hands. She looked exactly like the woman in the locket. Sarah. The resemblance was unmistakable. I went to the house. "Dad," she cried. It was boarded up. The neighbors said you just vanished. I called the shelters. I called the hospitals. I thought you were dead. I thought I lost you both. I couldn't let you see me," Thomas said, shame heavy in his voice. "Not after I lost the house. Not after I couldn't save your mother. I felt like I failed you. I didn't want to be a burden, Jenny. I didn't want you to see your father as a beggar, a burden." Jennifer shook her head fiercely, tears flying. "You're my